I'm actually using quotes from history books that I take verbatim. We used to call this plagiarization, but now we call it curating. But the reason for this was very simple. I had the thing going with all these ghosts cross-talking, and I was having so much fun. So much masturbatory fun, actually, because when you write a ghost, they can do anything. The ghost did a backflip. The ghost's head flew off and turned into a pumpkin. Whatever you want. It's all fair game. So in that way, a ghost is a bit like a dream sequence. Totally up to you, Miss Writer. And I had a teacher, Tobias Wolff, who told me once, he said, George, in your writing career, you're allowed 3 dream sequences. So don't use them up. You know, so about halfway through this book, I could feel that my imaginary reader was starting to look askance at me. There's too much ghosts, too many ghosts, too much sort of free energy. And I also thought back to that first day when I saw Willie Lincoln's crypt, and I thought, why did that move me so much? Part of it was because I did, after that incident, do some research, and you find out such heartbreaking things about that situation. For example, Willie was Abe's favorite. He was his favorite because he was the most like him. He had the same, beauties and the same problems. Also, the Lincolns had a party scheduled at the White House. The party was set up to reduce costs. It was all in place. The invitations were out. The 2 boys got sick with what we now know as typhoid, but they just had high fevers. They consulted a doctor. The doctor said, I think it'll be fine. So they had the party, and it was that night that Willie took a turn for the worst, and he died weeks later. So the Lincolns definitely had the feeling that this party had, all the excitement and the noise, the Marine band playing downstairs, had hastened their son's death. How do you live with that? So when I asked myself, how do you know all that stuff, and in what form do you know it? I just knew it from 5 or 6 history books. So sitting there in my writing room, I thought, wow, could I just put that stuff in there directly? And I answered myself, it's your book. So I went to this period of cutting up typing up all those texts. Elizabeth Keckley, there's another one, I forgot the names by now, but typing them up and then cutting them up with scissors and spending days on the floor of my study moving them around like a puzzle, And I started to think, one, I'm just doing this to avoid real writing, which I kind of was. Also, it did seem a little bit, invalid in some way. And then one day I had a certain arrangement of that party scene, and I took this out, put that in, and suddenly when I read it, it came alive for me. It had been sort of 1.7 dimensions, and it suddenly became 3-dimensional in my mind. And I thought, well, if that isn't writing, I don't know what is. In other words, my job is to, when you're reading that scene, to make that party seem real to you, so you don't quibble with it. So it enters into your mind as something that actually happened. Well, that happened to me that day, so I thought, okay, this is a valid thing to do. Now, not long after, when the book came out, one of the reviewers said, like the book, but isn't that fake news? Because what I did after that was I also made some up. Once I started putting in these historical bits, I felt it was okay if I just invented some. So the quarrel was, isn't this fake news? And I just would like to close with one very important idea, I think, in our time. The political age we're in right now is one in which so many fundamental values are getting kicked around. What's really being lost is subtlety and nuance in public rhetoric. We are constantly saying things that we know aren't true. I say we to be generous. But this is one of the reasons that art is so essential. And I would argue that part of the reason we got to this pass in our history is because we've been insufficiently reverent toward art. Why do I say this? When I write a book about Lincoln, and I put in some true historical bits, and then I make some up, you and I are in a very intimate relationship at that point. You came into the tent labeled novel, and you said, make it happen by any means necessary. I know you're lying to me. I want you to lie to me. Just do it well, so I believe it's true. And what we're doing together is we're discovering a more transcendent truth than we can get at by walking around the world every day. It's almost like I have a vision I'm working in, I'm revising, and in that mode, I stop being this dummy and start being, for a couple minutes a day, a better person. Funnier, smarter, more insightful, more empathetic. You, on the other end, reading, hopefully, are doing the same thing. This beautiful being is rising out of the normal you, up, and I'm coming up, and if in the perfect world, we're like two fish that kind of come out and kiss, and kind of go back to our life. So when I say, when I make up a bit in a story like this, it's a little bit like when you're a kid and someone says, I'm going to tell you a ghost story, and it happened in this very room. It didn't. But if you believe it did, it's a better story. So in a sense, now this is quite different from being, for example, in the White House briefing room. And a cat comes in, and we say, look, a raccoon. That's not it. So let me pause there, and we have a little bit of time for questions. I'd be happy to answer any. Thank you very much. I've been traveling for this book for almost a year now, and one thing I notice is some Darwinian thing. The person who asks the first question is always turns out to have the highest sexual energy in the room. Yeah. I had a feeling about you, sir. Yeah.
My question is, the book is unusual.
Yes.
As you said, you fudged a lot. Mm-hmm. And the question I have is, how did you sell this to your agent, your editor, and the publisher?
Yes.
When it was so, I have this idea.
Yeah, that's a good question. The truth is, I didn't sell it until I had it. I mean, I had a contract, and I just worked on the first third for about 2 years before I showed anybody. So by that time, I kind of knew, as I said earlier, part of your job as a writer is to know the obvious problems with what you're doing, So, for example, if I am going to decide that tonight, when I interview Vice President Biden, which I'm doing, that I'm going to wear a tight pink silk shirt. Let's say I decide that. Well, okay. I feel strongly I should do that. All right. You're going to want to think about that. And you're going to want to take precautions. So in my case, that would mean wearing 2 windbreakers over it. But in art, there's always a problem at the beginning. With this book, I knew it was going to be a hard sell. So my responsibility as a writer is to make it so all the difficulties earn difficulty. In other words, the idea of just making difficulty because you can, I'm not interested in that. My thought was, the book's main goal is emotional. So anything that's weird or hard about it, it has to serve the emotion of the book. And what I started to feel is if I could get that first third shaped just right, and I spent so many hours on it, then your reaction might be, and I think a lot of people have this, I don't get this. But I'm intrigued. I'm going to keep, I still don't get it. Wait, I'm getting it. And I think right around page 30, people kind of make a decision. It either works for them or they go review it on Amazon. But that was the game. So then the idea is if you do something at the beginning good enough, it'll pay off in the end. So I wrote it for those 2 years. I showed it to my wife, which I show her everything first. And we've been together 30 years, and she knows me. She knows my BS. She knows my virtues. And usually if she doesn't, like with that Mexico book, she wasn't mincing her words. And she was absolutely right. So with this book, I showed it to her, and she wrote me a note that was so nice that I will never tell anybody in this world what it said. But I went, all right then. She got it. And then I just went on. And then I sent it to my editor, and he had also a positive reaction and was willing to sort of take the chance with me. Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Saunders. Hi. I have a question about, I guess this is between the fact and the fiction, and it's like the theology or like the religious beliefs that underpin it. I'd never heard of a Bardo. I know of Bridget Bardo, but and the thing that shows up, the matter of the light bloom. Can you help me with those words? The light bloom phenomenon
yes.
thing that happens. So would you be able to tell us if all of that was fictional or if some of it was based in some kind of religious theology?
Sure, yeah. Well, my wife and I are Buddhists, and I originally thought, and in Tibetan, Bardo just means transitional state. So we're in one right now, the Bardo between birth and death. And then the one that the book refers to is the one that starts from the moment of your death to whatever comes next. And in Buddhism, of course, they believe it's reincarnation. So I started with that, and for a long time I thought I will try to read and learn the Tibetan Book of the Dead and make everything match. But then, at some point, you realize that it's a novel, and the novel has things that it does. It makes beauty, it makes truth, it makes propulsion, it changes your mind, all those beautiful things. It really isn't the very best instrument for recounting fact, actually. We have books for that, So this is kind of like if you had this beautiful Ferrari and you're like, oh, a paperweight. No, well, you could. So I thought, at some point I'm not going to worry too much about being faithful to the Tibetan text, since I'm not a scholar in that area. So I'm going to use what I want to use. And what I love about the Buddhist epistemology is a couple things. One is they say that whatever your death is going to be like, it's just like right now. In other words, our minds are in very strong habituated places every instant of our life. We don't even notice it after a while. We're so used to it. But we have inclinations of mind. It's not going to be any different at the moment of your death. And if I'm understanding the text right, it's not going to be different after. With one exception, the texts say that your mind in your body is sort of like a wild horse. Our neurotic minds are so active and so crazy, and they make the world. Well, when we're alive, that's actually tamped down relative to what happens after death. They say it's like that wild horse tied to a pole. You cut the rope. The wild horse goes crazy. So whatever tendencies we have now, multiply it times 10 million. God help us, So that was intriguing, the idea that your habits of thought and worry and covetousness wouldn't actually go away when you die, but they would be exaggerated. So the book is set in a place where people have such intense regrets or hesitations that they can't actually go on to the next thing, and they stay there. So that was really about all that I took literally. Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. And
Thank you.
have to modify sort of my question, because I was going to ask about like the theme of ghosts in your stories, Civil War Land and Bad Decline, and the novel, just sort of how the idea of a ghost evolved. But I'm going to sort of modify it. And it's funny you mentioned Infinite Jest, because it's another sort of ghost story, I guess, to an extent. But I guess, where do you find influence in this theme? In the theme of ghosts, the supernatural. Sure. Where does that, for you as an author?
Yeah, Flannery O'Connor, one of my favorite writers, she said a writer can choose what he writes, but he can't choose what he makes live. So I teach at Syracuse, and we get something like 600 applications a year, and we pick 6 people to come study there. So these are world-class writers, and that O'Connor quote is so important, because most writers start off with a love, of course, for other books, a love for other writers. We tend to imagine ourselves in a lineage of writers, and we start out by imitating. That's one of the first things we do. But we soon find out that the thing we want to do might not be the thing we should do. Sort of like if you thought, I'm going to write string quartets a la Shostakovich, and whenever you wrote one, everybody fell asleep. But whenever you picked up an accordion and people danced, you're like, So for some reason, I don't really know, I like ghosts. Ghosts make my books come alive. I can justify it. It reminds me that this reality we're in right now is not the only one. I kind of like that idea. But really, I just do it because I love it. And I think with all of us, we start out with an intention of who we want to be, and we start out imitating somebody. For me, it was Hemingway. I had this medical affliction called a Hemingway Boner, actually, which is... Many writers get this. So for many years, I had, Hemingway is up on this mountain, and I just want to go be his acolyte. I want to stand up on his level. So I clawed my way up there over many years, working class kid, writing in Hemingway voice, Nick went into the Walmart. It was pleasant, So you claw your way up there, and then when you get close, you find out that guy is standing on about a 6-inch pedestal. You are never going to get up as high as Hemingway. You're always going to be at his armpit, So, forget him. Why am I imitating that guy? I'm a working class person. I'll never imitate anybody again. You trudge down the hill, and you get to the bottom, and you go, Kerouac Mountain. There's a working class guy, and you do that. So for me, this was the whole process, and after many, many years, including that Mexican novel, I just was so sick of it, and I realized that I knew some things at that point in my life, and I didn't have a form or style in which I could express those very small, very precious things. many of which had to do with class. So I wrote this little story, a crazy little story that was in my first book, and it felt so much like me, and it was so minor. I was so disappointed. It was a very bittersweet thing. It was like you look over and there's a little shit hill, and it says Saunders Mountain. And, you know, Saunders is misspelled. You know, yeah. But I think that, in a nutshell, that's every writer's journey. Is you go from imitating great writers to being the little clod that you are, and hoping that the shit hill will grow over the years. I can take one more, and then we'll have to say goodbye. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I am a tired, sad, and exhausted MFA student who is worried my degree is about to be derailed by this tax bill. So I was wondering, what advice do you have for young writers and scholars in light of the current political moment?
Do it more and do it better. I have that advice for everybody. You know, the enemy right now is that despair that we felt a year ago. Oh, I'm quitting. This world sucks. It's not what I thought it was. I think the novelistic standpoint is, the world isn't what I thought it was. How interesting. Let's figure this out, you know. I think we also have to remember that that the fabric of the country is being held together by the tens of thousands of decent acts that we all commit every day. That's the real culture. The real culture doesn't come from on high, and we're finding out it never did, actually. It comes from each of us. And so I think it's an exciting time to be an artist, and I think I tell myself every day two things. One, I don't know what's going on. You know, you watch TV, and everybody knows what's going on, and every day it's different, you know. I think it's actually very healthy, spiritually healthy, to say we don't know. This is something new. And the second thing is to say, I forgot what it was already. That's so interesting. You know, what was that second thing? Darn it. Yeah. Oh, well. No, the second thing is that despair actually is the enemy. I'm convinced that our country is on the brink of a beautiful breakthrough. You know, our vision of ourselves, that we're going to actually live into our creed. All people created equally, all people containing God or Buddha or whoever equally. We're going to see each other that way. We're going to treat ourselves better. We were almost there. I really think we were close to it. This is kind of a last-minute spasm, but we'll endure it. And whatever we do in our lives, if we do it the best we can with a smile on our face, we'll get through this crap a lot faster. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George Saunders. Thank you very much. And Mr. Saunders will be autographing his book across from the elevators on this floor. Thank you very much.